welcome to Kestryl and Company. I'm Kestryl, your host. Today we're going to be talking about pagan parents and a lot of the issues on parenting that happen within the pagan culture. And my guests today are Morgan Foxmore and Lord Snowwolf. Welcome to my circle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know that there are a lot of things in the pagan culture that people don't quite understand. Oh, how could you raise your children in that religion? And when I hear that question, most of the time I just say, well, it's like taking them to any other church. But I guess in a way that's not quite true.
Well, it's true in a way, and it's not quite true in another way. I think what people are responding to when they ask that question, how can you raise your, is the difference in between their religion and ours. And part of the reason why they respond that way is because they don't understand what we do. We are a minority religion, and we don't have the exposure that some of the other more mainstream quote unquote religions have. So someone who's a Jewish child growing up in a Jewish family is different, but the Jews have had more exposure, so they're seen as being more normal.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're thinking of what they see on the Late Show with dancing around the bonfires and people screaming and
sacrificing chickens and
yes,
whatever.
And for the most part, the children, at least in my tradition, are brought to the celebrations, to the festivals. And it mirrors a lot of the Christian churches, because when the adult things start happening, when it's the sermon, they all go out to Sunday school. Mm-hmm. So it's the celebration that the children are brought to. But I think raising children in a pagan religion is almost easier, because the lessons, since we try to work with the earth and we are constantly involved in our spirituality, we drive to work and we talk about what's going on with the seasons. Everyday things become more important, so it's always part of being in church.
Rather than just going once a week.
On Sunday.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think also that it's such a celebratory faith. We do so much singing and dancing, and I will admit that there are places where the children probably don't belong,
Mm-hmm.
up to a certain age. But by the same token, cutting them out of the religion and doing it secretively I don't think is right either. I know that there are a few people in the pagan community who are still in the broom closet, as it were, and they're even so with their children. They have this little teeny altar in the corner of their bedroom, and the children are never seeing it because they're going to be locked in their bedrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but it's an important thing where the W word, the which word. For a long time, both of my children watch Saturday morning television, and they watch The Wizard of Oz, and they just could not make the connection between what Mommy does and the Wicked Witch of the West. Mm-hmm. My oldest son, in talking to him, came up with a whole new term for our religion, and he calls himself a spirit person, because I said, we get involved with the spirit of the world, and he said, that means we're spirit people. And he can talk to his other first grade friends about being a spirit person, mm-hmm. whereas if he says he's a witch, he opens himself to ridicule.
Right. Well, in a sense, I like that spirit person thing, because to a certain degree we're not so much religious as a faith as we are spiritual, mm-hmm. and living our lives spiritually and involving the spirit in everything that we do, mm-hmm. and everything that we try to do.
How do you handle the kindergartner that goes to school and says, my mommy's a witch and she'll cast a spell on you if you aren't nice to me?
We talk about taking responsibility for yourself and not doing things to other people.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't heard that has happened yet.
I have heard that happening.
At least not to
Well,
me. It hasn't happened in my house yet.
I have heard of that happening also, but fortunately my children are still young enough that they haven't run into that yet. And one of the things that I plan on doing, and I see childcare as taking a lot of advanced planning, where the parents get together late at night in strategy sessions and, how are we going to deal with this? And one of the things that we've talked about as parents is to make sure that the teacher knows who we are and to be very involved in the child's education, rather than just sending them off to school and letting them do whatever it is they do at school and, come home and say, oh, how was your day today? And, that's I don't know what to call it, but I think that's wrong. I think a parent needs to be involved in the child's education.
Regardless of their faith.
Regardless of their faith. And with us, it's particularly important because there are so many buzzwords associated with our religion. Witch and Satanist and, all those things that have been wrongly associated with us need to be addressed beforehand. And of course, if the child says, my mommy's a witch and she's going to put a spell on you, it's like, my brother's bigger than yours.
Beat you up. Yeah.
And and I don't know how seriously that's going to be taken. But on the other hand, I see a value in addressing the issue beforehand.
That's one of the things I think we agree on very strongly, is not just talking to the teachers, but talking to if you're going to send your child to public school, talking to the administration as a whole, and offering to go and talk to the classes. Mm-hmm. And, my family does this just as a courtesy for the public now, even though our children aren't old enough to be in public school yet. Mm-hmm. If we are asked, I have one young student who asked me to come and talk to her history class about the faith, and that was very refreshing. And the teacher did sit down with me that morning over coffee and said, well, now, what are you going to be talking about here? So I explained it to her, and she was very much at ease by the time we were finished. And I had several very appreciative letters from parents afterwards. I think one of the things that bothers me a bit in the pagan community somewhat is that there are those pagan parents who have been raised by families who have shoved the family faith down their throat, and they will say, I will, by God, not have a Christian child. That's all there is to it. They are going to be pagan, or they're going to live and die pagan if I have any say about it. And I think that's just as bad as what was done to them as children. It's the same thing.
Yes, well, parents learn from their own parenting. And so there's a tendency to pass on what we learned as children to our children.
And yet, it's a harder thing to impose because we don't have Sunday school for the most part. And I don't think that there's a large proportion of pagan parents who insist on it. I hope not. I even faced that issue. We all hope that our children are going to be pagan. I want to share those celebrations fully with my children when they get old enough to be interested. Right now they would just be bored to tears and go off in the corner and go to sleep. But my stepdaughter, who lived with us when she was 4 till she was 8, was part of my religion for those 4 years. And she has made the decision that she wants to be a Christian. But she's carried a lot of the pagan values with her. Mm-hmm. She's 15 now. She's very involved in environmental issues in her high school and takes a lead in them. She is very tolerant of all other faiths and cannot conceive even of belittling someone because of their faith. So even though she worships in a Christian church, she carries part of my belief structure with her.
Well, I think that's very important. One of the things we're trying to do with our children is make sure that they get to Sunday school in a Christian church, and make sure that they get to go to Jewish synagogue, and that eventually they'll get to go to as many different churches as we can expose them to, so that when they're of an age, 8, 10, 12, 15 years old, whenever that mood strikes them to choose their spirituality, what path they want to choose for themselves. But in doing that, we also hope that we teach them enough sense of self to, act as your stepdaughter has, and not, not carry on ridicule just because of someone's faith.
Yeah.
Or because they're different in any other way. Yeah. One of the ladies that we had on around Halloween, Esmeralda, she goes around in costume doing safety talks about trick-or-treating at Halloween, dressed as a storybook witch, and not only teaches that lesson, but the lesson that just because someone looks different doesn't mean they're awful, or ugly or mean. And, I think that's one of the things that a lot of people are shocked to see that pagans look like everybody else.
Yeah.
We don't have warts on our nose.
We don't wear funny pointy black hats.
At least not on all holidays. But, what do you feel are some of the really important issues that pagan parents might be faced with that mainstream parents might not necessarily have to deal with?
Well, partly something that you brought up earlier is the question of anonymity. How much do I tell my children? I have separated from my husband. We've gone through a divorce period, and at first he was very negative about the whole breakup, although now he's very comfortable with it. And he filed a countersuit claiming that I was an unfit mother because I am a Wiccan. So sometimes you have to hide these things. I work in a very conservative business, and I could conceivably lose my job. It's difficult to walk that fine line with children of, I want to show them my faith, and yet how much can I tell them? I think that's probably the hardest issue. That and other children making fun of them when they're little.
Well, I think that regardless of faith or at-home practice, one of the things that I found myself experienced myself as a child, and that I've seen repeated year after year the more events I go to, there is a tendency with children, because they are so honest and so blunt, that they have no concept of being gentle about anything, much less when they're angry. And they can have a very cruel streak when they go to make fun of anyone.
Oh, yes.
And admittedly, we don't need to give extra fuel to the fire. But on the other hand, should we hide the fact that we're Wiccans, or should we just explain to our children that there are some things you don't talk about at school, and if you don't want to get into deep-rooted conversation about religion at school, unless you're in a religious class.
Well, children are very sensitive to being different, so a lot of times they won't raise the issue themselves. But they have questions about that, and that's one of the things I like about pagan parents. They seem more willing to face the hard issues earlier on, instead of patting the child on the head and saying, well, we'll talk about that in 3 or 4 years when you're ready. No, whether it's personal responsibility or sex or
I completely agree.
anything.
They have a tendency more to realize that the child is old enough to know, in simple terms, the things that they're old enough to ask about. And I also think that, as one of the topics that you brought up there just briefly was the sexual issue. That becomes very important when they're teenagers, but it's important way before that. We have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I'm getting ready to have another baby this coming June, and of course, my 4-year-old's first question was, well, how did it get in there? And, so we have to sit down, we talk about the blessing part from the goddess, but that's not where we leave it. We don't leave it under a cabbage leaf somewhere. If she's old enough to ask, she's old enough to understand. Mm-hmm. And she's getting to the point also where she really is starting to understand that the goddess is big, real big. She's big enough to cover everybody.
Yeah.
Well, too, and it's not dirty, it's not shameful, it's not something you have to duck.
Your body's something to be proud of.
It's not something that you sweep under the rug.
Yeah.
And actually, it's in education. I know from my studies in psychology that a child or any person learns better when they are interested in what's going on. And if someone is interested enough to ask you what's happening, how did the baby get in mommy's tummy, then they're going to be much more receptive to the answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, but to young children, I've been going through this with my 6-year-old. He's curious, and yet it's a very minor curiosity, and he'll ask, and I'll tell him, and he'll either be satisfied and walk away, or he say, "Oh, that's yucky," and really turn away in disgust. And I'm never going to do that.
At which point you look at them and go, "Wait until you're about 12."
Can I have that in writing, please? It's such a minor thing, and perhaps it's cultural, perhaps it's not even religious, perhaps it's simply the American culture. But I think that a lot of non-pagan parents make a bigger deal out of it than it needs to be because they've been taught that it's dirty and it's nasty and you should hide it.
Well, I also think that a lot of that comes from, it's rooted in that, being taught that your body is something you have to cover up and you have to be ashamed of and you have to hide it from everyone and you're not supposed to share it with anybody, and that's all there is to it. I think that some of it comes from that. I also think that when it comes to a child's curiosity, as long as you keep in mind what age level you're dealing with and you don't talk to a 15-year-old when you're speaking at a 4-year-old, it can be explained in terms, especially if you're like me who has a lot of study and medical background and can pull out books with pictures, on a pretty regular basis. As I get larger, Amber's like, "Can I see those pictures again?" Because she really wants to see what's going on. She's very interested. And if you just tell them, they'll pretty much make their own decisions. I think another thing that I really respect in pagan parents is that we have a tendency to teach our kids a very strong sense of self, where, being different is okay. Mm-hmm. It's not a bad thing to be different. It's good to be different. It's good to be individualized. And if you give them a strong enough sense of self, I think that when, they go to school and other kids say, "Well, you're different. I don't like you because you're different." They can say, "Okay."
Yeah. Well, you're different too.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's because such a keynote of our religion is personal responsibility. I am in charge of what I do. It's my karma. I don't blame my problems on some evil power. They're mostly my fault.
I made mistakes. Okay,
yeah, I'm now going to fix them.
Right, and what I give out comes back to me threefold. So I have to be careful about what I'm giving out. Because if I go about ignoring my child and ignoring the issues that are coming up and ignoring what's going on around me and not dealing with stuff, then when I have needs and when I try to put stuff out there, I'm not going to get anything back.
I think a real good illustration of that, believe it or not, was when I went and saw the new movie Peter Pan. The husband is going bananas, and he's on the phone and he's doing business and he's not paying attention to the kids, and the kids are going, "Come on, Dad, we're on vacation." And the mother throws his cellular phone out the window and says, look, your children want to spend time with you now. This time isn't going to last very long, and pretty soon you're going to be chasing them for time. And I think that's another thing that I've seen with pagan parents, is that they take the time to really sit down and talk to their kids. They don't just say, well, what did you do in school, and let me see the stars you got, and oh, smack, smack, you got an F in such and such. You know, they sit down and they talk about why, you know, what's going on in your life. Are you dealing with seasonal depression because the sun isn't out, you know? Rather than, and in return, I think the karmic law is going to come back to them, and their children, when they get old, you know, their children will have more of a tendency to want to spend time with them.
Well, I think part of that too is one of the benefits of not having as organized a religion as many people do. You can't rely on the Sunday school teacher. You can't rely on the pastor or the preacher or the priestess to teach your children these lessons. You have to do it, and the only way to do it effectively, because if you put it all off for Sundays, you go crazy, is to address them each day as each thing comes up, and you need to give your children time and attention to do that. And they come up with the damnedest questions.
Oh yeah, they
do.
Oh yeah,
Oh
they
boy.
do.
You know, I was driving to work one day, and we were pretty well covered. My 6-year-old's very interested in death now, so we've talked about death and reincarnation. He said he had a real important question, and I was all ready. I was prepped, and he said, "Who do spirit people swear by?" I'm driving to work. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. I haven't had enough sleep.
Or coffee.
Or coffee. And my child hits me with this. So you've got to, it makes you question your own religion more to be able to put that in 6-year-old terms.
I think that's one of the things I really enjoy about my 4-year-old, is that she makes me think. She makes my brain work. Sometimes she makes my brain work overtime. She comes up with the darndest stuff. And my son, my younger son, is even more so. I remember when he was about Amber's age, he was about 5, I guess. We were in the kitchen doing something, and we had just let the sink drain. And he looked at me and he said, "Mom, why does the sink go blub blub?" 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, what makes the sink go blub blub? And so I had to think about it and tell him, because he was not about to settle for, well, I don't have time for that now.
Yeah.
You know, he wanted an answer, and he wanted a decent answer, and he wanted it now. And my 4-year-old is the same way. She's really amazing.
Yeah. Now I have a younger child too. I also have a 4-year-old, and he is very different from his brother. He is very much of the moment and throws himself into the celebrations just headlong. And the 6-year-old's very analytical. He wants to know why and what we're doing, which is nice to see the different people that have come to me. But he doesn't need explanations and doesn't even ask for them. He just jumps right in.
Funny.
We have our 2-year-old is pretty spontaneous that way.
That's very nice in a circle. That's one thing that the pagan religions offer that at least the church that I was raised in don't. The spontaneity and the joy that a lot of us as adults strive for, to get back to. We embrace the maiden aspect of our goddess, and we call upon the young god, the laughing god, to find that in ourselves. And paying attention to our children makes it, you know, it's easier for us because we've got little role models.
Well, I remember
reflections. Yeah.
a gift that my younger daughter just got for her birthday. She got a set of finger paints. I had forgotten how much fun finger paints were. My kids reteach me how to play. And I think that's one of the things that as adults we get so bogged down in the everyday, we forget a lot, and we need to remember more.
Well, especially since it is such, the passage from one to the other is so important. and the constant return that, when my children say, why, you haven't played with me all day, why don't you play with me? I can't give them a good answer.
And I've worked hard all day is not a good answer.
Right. And when you can't give a good answer for something, that means you need to take a look at what you're doing.
Yeah.
And reason it out, and maybe drop a little bit of your tiredness and make a response and
Well,
say, why not?
But play is
Why
very
not?
rejuvenating.
Yes, it is.
And you do get bogged down in being serious and adult.
Yes, we're being adults now. And I think one of the things we've come up with in our household that was very good is that we have adult time, and then we have the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime during the rest of the day, the kids are welcome to come and ask questions and do what they want and have us play with them if that's what they want. But during adult time, that's adult time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think kids need to have kid time too.
Yeah.
If we could say one thing to wrap up that's very important to you personally as a pagan parent, what would it be?
Oh, that I want my child to have the best feeling of self that I can give him. I don't want him to be afraid of things, and I don't want him to blame other things. I want him to be responsible for himself, for his joy, and for all of the things that he does. And I'm hoping that that's the greatest thing that I can teach him from being a pagan.
Thank you both for being with me today. I appreciate the views that you've given us. I hope that all of you as parents out there will give your children the availability to make their own choice where their spirituality is concerned when the time comes. And that if you have any questions, feel free to write us and we'll do our best to answer them for you, child or parent alike. Thanks for joining us today on Kestryl and Company. Come back and join us again.